Hey, what is going on, everybody? It is Blue, and I am finally getting around to an introductory Feral guide. So this guide will be more for players wanting to get into the spec. This is a Druid spec, which comes with a lot of utility, so it can be pretty daunting to look through these spells, read them all, and then try to figure out, hey, how do I play Feral? So what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to make it as easy of a transition as possible, and then what I would suggest is I do dedicate a lot of my time, a lot of my videos towards the higher end Feral players that are wishing to know every minute detail about the spec and really just perform it at its tops. So what I would do is I would suggest, hey, once you're more confident and with the spec, you kind of understand it a little better, hopefully this guide will assist you with that. After this guide, it's just going to take a lot of practice. But once you get more confident, I would suggest go ahead and look through my videos, look through specific things that you're wanting. And then also, go ahead and jump into my Discord. We made a Discord just for Feral players. If you have quick questions that you want answered immediately, there's a lot of really good players on there. I also monitor the Discord myself to try to give some quick answers, some quick suggestions. But that's it, you guys. I really hope you enjoy the video. Take it easy. Peace. Alright, you guys, so I have given myself the daunting task of how to explain Feral, and after thinking about it, I think the best way to do so is just go through some of the abilities in a specific order, and then if you're brand new to the spec, I would use those abilities first, and as I go through, put the abilities, the order that I'm doing them, onto your bars in a way that makes sense to you. So what we're first going to be checking out is Feral, of course, is a spec that depends on energy. It uses abilities that cost energy to go through its rotation. And when I mean rotation, it is a combo point generating spec. It uses those combo points to do bigger hitting abilities. And when I mean by rotation, rotation to me just means 0 combo points through 5 combo points and then hitting a big combo point ability, and then that rotation ends when you go back to 0 and restart. So let's go ahead and take a look at which abilities generate combo points and those big finishing abilities. Alright, so with Feral, these are basically all of our damaging abilities. So there's actually not too many damaging abilities for Feral. Now the thing that may be complicated for Feral, for individuals running into Feral, is none of these abilities actually have any cooldowns. So you can press any one at any time as long as you have the energy to do so. Now of course pressing the wrong abilities could be quite a bit of a damage loss. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down each ability, and we're going to give them into certain classifications. I think the more classifications we have, the better you can understand them. So what I did is I broke up the abilities. These 4 right here are the only abilities Feral has to generate combo points. Now these 3 abilities are our finishing moves. Let's further classify them even more by saying this first one right here, this first row, is our single target damage abilities. And this one is our AoE damaging abilities. Then we're going to classify them even further. This one is our bleed single target. This one is our upfront damage single target. Likewise, our bleed AoE and our upfront damage AoE. Now, that's the same thing here with our combo, with our finishing moves. What you need to know, and this kind of makes it a little bit easier to understand, is these upfront damaging abilities, the damage of these are increased if the target is bleeding. Now these ones say that it does so. This one doesn't particularly say it does so, but we do have a trait, which is Taste of Blood. This is your best Feral trait. Your potency trait, once you get that, it's pretty much going to build this. It's going to be a built-in mechanic where Ferocious Bite does increase damage if the targets are bleeding, just like these other ones. So let's go ahead and take a look at our single targets first. We have Rake. Rake the target for bleed damage and an additional, for an upfront damage and an additional bleed damage over 15 seconds. And reduce the target's movement speed by 20% for 12 seconds, which is really nice. Now what you're going to notice about these single target damage abilities is they have an added benefit if you are stealthed or not. So Rake, the added benefit, says while stealth, Rake will also stun the target for 4 seconds and deal 60% increased damage. Now, I'm going to read over Shred, but just to make it very simple for you, since these both have a stealth mechanic, very, very easy rule of thumb is you always stealth before a pack or boss fight because you get the added benefit. You get a little bit increased damage from these two. Always Rake, right? So we know that these do increase damage if the target is already bleeding. So as a rule of thumb, we always want to bleed the target before we work into these damage dealing abilities. Alright, with that said, let's go ahead and read Shred. Shred the target, causing initial damage to the target and deals 20% increased damage against targets that are bled. So it doesn't matter which type of bleed we have on the target, as long as there is some type of bleed on the target, we're golden. And then it says the added benefit, while stealth, Shred deals 60% increased damage and has double the chance to critically strike, and it also generates 1 additional combo point. Now, this is a lot of icing on the cake for being an ability for the added benefit of being Shred or stealth, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Remember, the golden rule, always open with Rake, and this mechanic right here being stealth, you will see this later on with DPS cooldowns, so don't worry too much about that. Now let's move on to our AoE abilities. We have, of course, Thrash, which we said is a bleed, so it strikes all nearby enemies, dealing a bleed damage, or upfront damage, a small upfront damage, very small, and additional bleed damage over 15 seconds. And then our upfront damage is swipe up to 5 targets. This one's capped, whereas Thrash is not. Inflicting upfront damage and 20% additional damage against targets which are bled. So very easy. Let's say I'm attacking this little seed over here. I'm going to stealth and I'm going to open up with Rake. Once that Rake is on the target, I have no need to cast Rake again. So I would suggest getting some type of weak aura, some way to track the bleed that you have on the target. So once that's done, very simple. Since this is a single target, I already did my bleed. Next one is just Shred. So very simple there. Now let's move on to these two over here. So again, we're going to stealth, open up with Rake. Now we're AoE, so I'm going to move over to this row. Well, this target's bleeding, so I could swipe right. But that swipe damage is going to be increased damage on this target, but not this target. So although this mob is bled with my Rake, I still want to make sure this mob's bled, so I want to Thrash. And then once this Thrash is on that target, now all mobs are bleeding. This one has 2, but it doesn't matter. As long as all mobs are bleeding somehow, now I can continue to swipe. Alright. So now we finally went through our rotation. We're close to the end of our rotation. We have 5 combo points. Now we're rewarded with being able to cast generally a bigger hitting ability. So just like these two abilities, we have an upfront, or we have a bleed, which is usually a bigger bleed, and then we have an upfront damage ability. So Rip, finishing move that causes bleed damage over time, and it lasts longer per combo point, okay? Now, I know if you read the tooltip, it looks a little bit weird as far as damage. The Rip damage is always the same, okay? But what happens is if you wait for longer combo points, the Rip will be increased duration. So the Rip effect on targets are always going to tick for the same amount, but a bigger Rip will last longer. Now, as a rule of thumb for newer players, I would say always use a finishing move with 5 combo points, okay? It's very rarely that I even do it. I would say I understand the mechanics very well. It's very rarely that I ever use a finishing move when I do not have full combo points, okay? It's rare situations where that happen. It can happen, but you are not going to be penalized as far as DPS for not doing such, so I would always suggest always use 5 combo points on these finishers. Moving on, we have our big damage ability is Ferocious Bite. This is a finishing move that causes physical damage per combo point and consumes up to 25 energy, additional energy, to increase damage up to 100%. Alright, so this one is a little bit interesting. This is the first time we run into what we call with Feral a pooling mechanic. So Ferocious Bite, it requires 25 energy to use at 5 combo points, and it says, hey, if you wait an additional 25% energy, it's going to increase the damage by 100% more. Well, what does that mean? You always Ferocious Bite at 50 energy. So this is my weak aura here. It shows me a little indicator with a 50%. So basically, you cruise through your rotation and you're ready to bite, but you're starved of energy. You don't have anything left. So you're going to wait. You're not going to cast any of these combo point generating abilities because they cost energy. You're just going to wait and auto-attack the target until that bite is available. Now it's at 50, big bite, and now you're done, and now you restart. So that's kind of how that one works, and that's what we call a pooling mechanic. Next, this is a talent. This is our AoE talent. This one gives us access to an AoE bleed ability in the form of Primal Wrath. Finishing move that deals instant damage and applies rip to all enemies within 11 yards, lasts longer per combo point. Kind of the thing we talked about. The more combo points you have, the longer these rips stay on the target. Now, the difference between rip and Primal Wrath, because they're all applying rip, and remember what I said, rip is the same damage no matter what. The only thing that is different is the durations. So the only thing different between a single target rip and this AoE rip is single target rip stays on the target for much longer. You can see at max 5 combo points, it's 24 seconds, versus this one is only 12 seconds. We really, on single target, you really want to have a big upfront bleed, staying on target as long as possible, because bite is our big chunk of damage. So the longer our bleed stays on the target, the more bites I can produce. So kind of that's what you want to be thinking about. So in Mythic Plus, you're going to be taking Primal Wrath to bleed all your targets, but for a single fight, when you get to the boss fight, you don't want to be casting Primal Wrath on the boss unless there's a lot of mobs around the boss. You want to switch AoE pulls, single target pulls, right? We want that rip staying on the target so I don't have to cast it as many times. Now, rip comes with Primal Wrath comes with a built-in AoE mechanic. Yes, it AoE rips all of our mobs around, and it does some sort of AoE cast as well that's built into this Primal Wrath, that you can think of it kind of like as a swipe source of damage that is not target capped, okay? But still, even though that's built-in AoE source of damage as well as the rip, like I said, always rip single targets and primal AoE targets that you want bleeds on everything. Okay, so moving on now that you're kind of aware of our abilities, the offensive abilities for Feral, and kind of that bar that we talked about, that's a little hint there. It can be confusing with that bar 1 switching. Let's go ahead and talk about our offensive cooldowns. So Feral has 3 offensive cooldowns, 2 of them being actually your Feral abilities, and then 1, of course, being your Covenant choice. Now, really quickly, I would suggest being a Night Fae Feral, as it produces the most damage. It is quite a significant increase from Night Fae Covenant to any one of the others. So I would definitely suggest doing Night Fae, as well as it has the added benefit if you are switching into a different spec of Druid, that Night Fae will do really well in all forms. Now what you will see with Feral is our abilities, other than the Night Fae Convoke, increase our damage by helping us get through our rotation. So this is really nice. Helping us get through rotation means we can usually bite more, or we can do more finishing moves, which are kind of our bigger damage spells. So our very first one is Tiger's Fury. Instantly restore 50 energy and increase the damage of all your attacks by 15% for their full duration, and this lasts 10 seconds. So here we come to our first type of Feral-specific mechanic, which is called snapshotting. And it says, so we read that Tiger's Fury increases damage by 15% for their full duration. So it's referring to our bleeds. So let's scroll over Rip here. Rip, we know, lasts 24 seconds. So essentially, if you cast 1 Rip, let's say I'm ripping this seed, if you cast 1 Rip during your Tiger's Fury window, that Rip will be, the damage of that Rip will be increased by 15%. Now, let's say Tiger's Fury falls off and this Rip is just ticking on that target, damage over time. That damage over time will not change, okay? So that initial damage is doing 15%, and now the Tiger's Fury, it's still ticking. Those ticks will not do less damage. It will do the same amount of damage as that original cast. So generally, if you want to try to sneak in all of your bleeds during this Tiger's Fury window, but I would not worry about that, okay? Tiger's Fury has such a low cooldown that you're going to be casting this back to back. Very easy cooldown for us. Generally, the rule is just cast it whenever you can. If you can sneak in your bleeds during that Tiger's Fury window, do so, but don't worry about it. Now, let's move on to Berserk. Go Berserk for 20 seconds, causing Rake and Shred to deal damage as though you were stealthed. So we talked about earlier, we talked about those combo points, single target abilities having extra mechanics or extra effects, depending if you're stealthed or not. So here we go. This is our cooldown. Berserk makes it so those abilities act as if they were stealth, which are DPS increases for us, which is nice. And it says Berserk also giving finishing moves a 20% chance per combo point spent. We use 5 combo points times 20, so it's a 100% chance if you use it with full combo points to refund 2 combo points. So essentially, if I have full 5 combo points, and let's say I bite this seed, I will be refunded 2. So instead of starting at 0, I'll be refunding 2. So we can see they're already helping with going through my rotation faster. So it's a DPS increase for us. Now, Convoke, very easy. You cast this spell while you're in melee range in cat form, and you're going to be biting the target quite often. These bites are going to be free bites. You don't have to worry about the 50% energy. It's going to be doing it as a maximum energy for us, and it will also be casting these spells without touching our energy. These are just free 16 random cast spells. Very huge of a DPS cooldown for us. Alrighty, the very next thing that I want you to put on your bars are our defensive abilities, okay? Feral, as a spec, and if you're doing PvP content, Feral defensive abilities is its utility. Feral is generally seen as a squishier spec, and it overcomes this squishiness by being very quick and having a lot of utility. Now, for PvE content, for raid content, Feral has only 3 defensive abilities, because generally we can't avoid mechanics by running away. Now, those defensive abilities, first is Regrowth. We can heal ourselves a portion during our rotation. Now, that is because we have a passive effect in Feral, Predatory Swiftness. It says, your finishing moves has a 20% chance per combo point spent. Now, if we use 5 combo point abilities, and do a bite on a target, we have a 100% chance to make your next Regrowth or Entangling Roots instant, free, and castable in all forms. So right now, I do not have this proc. You're going to see if I cast Regrowth, it's going to take me out of Feral. It's going to take me out of cat form. But if I do a 5 combo point ability, this Regrowth will highlight, and I can cast this instantly while in cat form. Now, in raids, you can put this in your rotation. I wouldn't use this ability all the time. When I'm in raids, I use this ability if I'm waiting to bite, okay? Remember, there's a pooling mechanic where we have to wait till we have 50 energy to bite. During that time, there's nothing else for me to be doing. I might as well regrowth myself. If you get a little bit more advanced, you can go ahead and get some type of healing add-on so you can see your raid. And instead of healing yourself, you are able to cast Regrowth on a different target. Your Regrowth's not going to be huge heals, but it is something, okay? Now that is kind of a defensive ability. It's helpful, especially for just regular world content. You're definitely going to be using this a lot. This is going to be helping Feral survive. Now, for pure defensive abilities, we also have Bark Skin. This is an instant cast. Your skin becomes as tough as bark, reducing all damage you take by 20% and preventing damage from delaying your spell cast. So that really doesn't have any effect for us. And it lasts 12 seconds. This is usable while stunned, frozen, incapacitated, fear, or asleep, and in all shapeshift forms. So this one's really good. Now a trick is it says it's in all shapeshift forms. So this one you do not need to put on bar 1 like we spoke about before, since this is a all spec ability. Okay, now let's go ahead to Survival Instincts. reduce all damage you take by 50% for 6 seconds. So you're going to see these are two different defensive abilities. This first one, it does less damage, or less damage prevention, but it's only got a 1-minute cooldown. Now what I usually say is, if you are expecting damage, let's say you're in Mythic Plus and you know, hey, this mob pack does some AoE damage, or Prideful, for example, if you're doing a 10 key or above, he's going to pulse. So expecting this sort of damage, I would go ahead and use Barkskin, okay? I would use Barkskin in the middle of a Prideful pack just to reduce the damage that I know I'm expecting, to make it a little bit easier on your healer. Now, if I'm going to take unexpected damage, something really quick, or something that's I know is going to hit me and do a lot of damage, I will do Survival Instincts, okay? This is a huge defensive cooldown, but a really huge mitigation, right? So that's kind of how I think of it. And then also, if you have none, if you use your Barkskin, let's say, and then you're expecting more damage, then go ahead and Survival Instincts. Okay, next we're going to be talking about utility. Feral has a lot of utility. Now, what I want you to do is these specific utilities, I want you to put on your bars that you have some type of number or button associated with them. These are the utilities that you're going to be using quite often. There are more utilities that I want on your bars still, and I want in a specific section for you, just to know that they're there and use them when they're appropriate, but these are utilities that you're going to be using quite often. First of all, Prowl. Prowl is what shifts you into cat form and enters stealth. So what's really nice about it is if you are out of a different spec, let's say your bear form, instead of going cat form, going Prowl, you could just go Prowl immediately. So this is one that you want to put on a bar that is not one, that is shared amongst all classes, so you can quickly go into cat form and stealth. And of course you're going to be using this a lot to initiate boss fights, or to go from pack to pack. If there is time that you're able to stealth in between packs, you want to do that. Now we have our movement abilities. Remember, we talked about Feral has a lot of utility as far as movements to get away from mobs because we're squishy. The first one is Dash. Shift into cat form, again, one that we can do out of all forms, and increase your movement speed by 60% in cat form for 10 seconds. So very nice. Vice versa, we have, this is just for us, we have Stampeding Roar. Shift into bear form. So this one's a little bit different. So if you're out of cat form, you will turn into a bear. If you are in cat form, it will just keep you in cat form. So let loose a Wild Roar, increasing the movement speed of all friendly players within 18 yards by 60% for 8 seconds. So this is an AoE speed boost, same speed, but less time frame, okay? Very good for raid mechanics, for avoiding mobs, for just speeding up your party in general, helping a tank in Mythic Plus kite, or getting from one pack to another quickly. Very both useful, share the same cooldown, golden, I love them. Next one we have Typhoon. Now this is a utility that is affinity based. So depending on what you go on the 30-row talent row, you're going to have some type of utility. Balance has Typhoon. Guardian has Incapacitating Roar, which will kind of do a small fear for the pack. And then Resto Affinity has Ursol's Vortex, which you leave a small vortex in a designated area. If mobs try and leave that area, they get pushed back to the center. Now, I would suggest for Feral going Balance Affinity, gives you a little bit more range, where the other ones just give you more survivability. In PvP content, you may want to think about switching it up, but for PvE content, you're going to want the extra range and leave the survivability to your healers. So with Balance, our utility is Typhoon. Blast targets within 18 yards in front of you, and with a Violent Typhoon, knocking them back and dazing them for 6 seconds. Usable in all shapeshift forms. Now it says dazing them for 6 seconds. I have no idea what that means, because I wasn't even aware of that. Essentially what this is useful for is if there's multiple packs that need, we're going to put this up here too, I forgot. we're going to use multiple packs to push them back to interrupt. Now, be very, very careful when you use Typhoon, you guys, because it is really anti... it really doesn't have a lot of good synergy with other specs. A lot of specs will put something on the ground to increase their damage. Okay, we think of DKs, you know, they got their crap on the ground. Paladins got their crap on the ground. You know, Hunters have their Covenant ability, which puts stuff on the ground. It's just, be very mindful when you use Typhoon. So you generally, Feral's got so much utility as far as interrupts and stuns that I only use it if it's really necessary to get an interrupt and we're about to miss an interrupt on a pack, or if we're against a wall. If there's mobs against a wall, I'll push them, and they're not going to go very far. They're just going to be movement here to the back, and that's enough movement. I don't need it pushed too far. Also, this is great utility, so let's say the boss is right where I'm at. There is a mob really far. Ooh, good thing we're talking about this. I can put another thing of utility in here. We can go ahead and lunge to that mob, and then it will lunge me in back of them, and I will Typhoon and push them further. Now, I know that's not going to be a huge interruption to the group, because the group is mostly right here. This is just going to help push that mob that may be casting a little bit closer to help us cleave. Also, for utility, we have Skull Bash. This is our interrupt. For Feral, this is a really fun interrupt ability because it has a 10 yards range. So this can be used as utility as far as interrupts, but also really awesome is to get us out of a crappy situation. Let's say there's something cast under me. I can just pick a mob or a target that's a little bit further away, generally a caster, and I can just Skull Bash and it will teleport me, or it will lunge me to that target as long as I'm 10-yard range. Now, the counterpart to Skull Bash is a talent, Wild Charge, which will actually leap me behind an enemy, dazing them for 3 seconds. But this is used from 8 to 28 yards. So I have this same type of utility of getting me closer to a pack, getting me out of mechanic. Let's say this is a boss, this little weird seed right here. Let's say I have to use a mechanic or I run out. I want to quickly get back. I'm not really in range to Skull Bash, and maybe I want to save that interrupt anyways. I can just lunge to the target. Now, this lunge, probably being very well known, is different for every form. The Boomkin, of course, is the jump backwards. The Bear, same sort of thing as Feral, where it kind of just charges you to a target. Bear's got a immobilizing effect, so it really interrupts them. And then normal cast is, let's say we're in Mythic Plus and there's some people in front of me. I'm slowed, maybe I'm eating food, I'm trying to catch up. I'll go in Cat, and if these people are right there on the bridge, I'll jump out of Cat, and I will just leap towards them. This will fling me towards the target. Alright, so these are the ones you want on your bars. Now let's go ahead now and talk about ones that I want on your bars, but don't necessarily need a button associated with them. Alright, so these are Feral's other utility. Now, exactly what you see here is exactly what I have on my bars. We'll go ahead and put MAME up here as well. You can see it on my bars. These are not associated to any button in particular, but these are buttons that you do want ready on your bars somewhere. I usually put them in the same spot just so I can be reminded of our utility, and you will have to just kind of find uses for them. So we'll just go over them. Cyclone. This is a 1.5 second cast, which will take you out of cat form. Tosses the enemy target into the air, disorientating them, but making them invulnerable for up to 6 seconds. Only one player can be affected by your Cyclone at a time. This is kind of well known for the PvP environment. Then we have Hibernate, 1.4 second cast, which will also take you out of cat form. Forces the enemy target to sleep for up to 40 seconds. Any damage will awaken the target. Only one target can be forced to hibernate at a time. Only works on Beast and Dragonkin. And then, of course, we have Entangling Roots. Roots the target in place for 30 seconds. Damaging may cancel this effect. Now, the nice thing about Roots is, if you remember, we can have a free cast of Regrowth in our rotation. That free cast of Regrowth also can be a free cast of Entangling Roots. So depending on the situation, now for PvE content, generally we don't do this, but instead of healing myself, I can instead choose to root a mob in place. Now Soothe, this is one of our more used abilities, specifically in Mythic Plus. Soothes the target, dispelling all enraging effects. Now, let's see what this one is. Okay, Theater of Pain has this mob right here. This mob, it's the big dog, so you usually got this 3-pack and this big dog. This big dog does like an AoE ability where he just starts kind of pounding the ground and just damaging everybody nearby. That's a soothe mechanic, you guys. So very good right there. You just want to go ahead and soothe that target as well as the other side. So the other side, you're going to see this big guy. This big guy will enrage. He'll get bigger, and you may have noticed that he may go down to 0% health, but he's still just running around trucking people. That's also a soothe mechanic. There's 2 right here. Okay, so you probably remember these 2. So they'll enrage, and that's a soothable mechanic by Feral, or by a few specs, right? The next utility is 35 Tower Roll. I have Mighty Bash on here. This is just a really nice CC ability for 4 seconds. What's really great, remember we do have our interrupt. And then what I use as Mighty Bash is if I need to interrupt a second target, or maybe we missed an interrupt for Mythic Plus, this one comes very good and in handy. And then our last one, this is my least used ability, and I try to avoid using it at all costs. This is also a CC ability, but this is a finishing move. Now, finishing moves are very important for Feral because it's our big damage dealing, and this pretty much says instead of doing big damage, you are instead going to CC the target. So, you know, I don't really use that except for PvP, but it says finishing move that causes physical damage and stuns the target. Damage and duration increase per combo point. So you can see the max duration. It's only a CC for 5 seconds, which I get for free with Mighty Bash for 1 less second. And it doesn't cost combo points. So that's kind of what I go to. Now for PvP, having more utility, the better. But like I said again, what I would do is I would suggest putting those on your bar somewhere and just having them there in front of you, just so you can, you know, try to be reminded, oh, you know what, I do have some type of utility I can use for this environment. Oh, you know what, I do have Soothe, let me do that. Or I can do some type of alternate CC in the form of Mighty Bash. Alright, you guys, so that is pretty much it as far as Feral abilities. So hopefully by now you should have your UI set up and your abilities set up, and you can have them in a comfortable environment for what they do. Now let's go ahead and talk about talents. Now there is an in-depth talent guide that I went out and put out. I would highly suggest you watch that later on as you become a little bit more comfortable with Feral and the spec. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you cookie cutter builds. Okay, a cookie cutter build for a single target is going to look like this. So our first talent row, you're going to go Sabretooth. This is going to increase the damage of your bite. I would go Wild Charge. This gives us the utility of being able to come back to a fight after doing a mechanic, lunge to a target. Very good. Of course, Balance Affinity gives you that extra range. Depending on what you're doing, I would either go Mighty Bash or Mass Entanglement. Heart of the Wild is a little bit disputed. There are some people that think that's a very good way to go. I think it's very debatable, and it is a little bit more confusing. Another button to press. Also, it makes you do damage by going out of Feral, which could be a little bit more confusing. So I would stick to either Mighty Bash or Mass Entanglement. And then, of course, Soul of the Forest. Your finishing moves grant energy, which is nice. Energy helps us get the rotation faster. And it increases damage of our finishing move. Now, depending if this is pure single target, we're either going to go Brutal Slash, or if this is some type of AoE situation, Primal Wrath. Now, Brutal Slash, what it does is this will actually replace your swipe, which is generally, remember we talked about swipe, that's your AoE damage dealing ability. Well, this one's nice because Brutal Slash will replace your swipe and it will buff it. By buffing it, you only have 3 charges. So you can only use it 3 times. It does have a very quick cooldown of 7.3 seconds though, but this will actually do more damage, single target, than your shred, and it also gives the added benefit, hey, if there are maybe a few mobs around, you can still cleave them with Brutal Slash. Now for the 50 talent row, I would suggest as a new player going Feral Frenzy. Now what this ability will do is it unleashes a Furious Frenzy, clawing your target 5 times for a certain amount of damage, physical damage, and an additional bleed damage for 6 seconds. So this is very nice, and the added benefit is when you use this ability, if you were at 0 combo points and you use this ability, you just go crazy. It's like a channel. You will go from 0 energy to max, or 0 combo points to max combo points, and then you can do a finisher really quickly, and it has a low cooldown. Now, as you become more familiar with Feral, I would start dabbling a little bit and practicing with Blood Talons. Alright, now the only switch what we're going to do from single target to AoE, of course we're going to want to do that Primal Wrath. This is our finisher which bleeds the targets, and we're going to move Feral Frenzy to Moment of Clarity. Everything else remains the same, so good for us. Now, in Mythic Plus environments, you may want to go Predator. It says the cooldown Tiger's Fury resets when a target dies with one of your bleed effects active, and Tiger's Furies last longer. So this is really nice. It just increases the uptime of Tiger's Fury, but it does depend if it's more ad related. So Mythic Plus environment, if you're more worried about ad damage, or you're more worried about boss damage to increase your bites. So those ones kind of back and forth, whatever is more important to you. Primal Wrath we spoke about, and then you go Moment of Clarity. It says Moment of Clarity now triggers 50% more often. Is a passive we didn't talk about, and then can accumulate up to 2 charges and increase the damage of your next shred, thrash, or swipes by 15%, and it gives you an extra 30 increased energy. So basically what Omen of Clarity is you will see playing Feral that sometimes your shred, swipe, and thrash will light up. If those light up, you're getting a proc of Omen of Clarity, which means, hey, you can cast these abilities for free that won't cost any energy, which is really great. By going Omen of Clarity, when those light up, those are also going to be dealing 15% increased damage. So very good with that. Okay, we're getting towards the end of our video. What I would suggest as a Feral Druid to, as far as Legos, go Apex Predator. Apex Predator is the best all-around legendary for AoE and single target environments. What this will do is your Rip, which is your big single target bleed on the target, it will give you the opportunity once in a while to get a free bite. You will need to find some type of weak order to track this, but it will show up on your bars, and essentially you get a free bite that you can cast whenever you want. The nice thing about that free bite is since you have Soul of the Forest, using that bite will get you some more energy back, which could help you through your rotation. And as far as stats go, for Feral, you want to go Critical Strike. Feral has a mechanic, a nice passive mechanic that says Primal Fury. It says when your spells critically strike, they will double the combo points gained. So let's say our Shred usually gives 1 combo point for casting a Shred. If it crits, it will give 2 combo points. Now remember, Feral getting through our rotation faster means more damage. We saw this from our DPS cooldowns. This is a very nice DPS increase with the passive that is related to our stat Critical Strike. So Critical Strike will always be our best stat for Feral. Haste increases attack speed, spell casting speed, which doesn't matter for us, and energy regeneration. Haste does very minimal to our energy regen. Increasing our attack speed is very nice because our auto attacks do a good amount of damage, but generally this is not that great of a stat. Now it does also help our bleeds tick a little bit faster, which does have some type of synergy with Apex Predator, since that proc is related to our single target bleeds or our rips. But generally I wouldn't worry too much about haste. You want to focus on Critical Strike. Mastery increases the damage done by your cat form bleeds and finishing moves by a certain percent. As you increase this mastery, those bleeds will increase and those finishers will increase, those bite damage will increase. This is our second best stat. Very, very good in AoE and single target. Try to get crit and mastery if you can. Now versatility increases your damage and healing by a percentage and decreases damage taken. This is not a bad stat for us, but it's just not as strong as crit and versatility. All right, you guys, I hope I covered everything. There is so much to talk about with Feral. Now, what I would suggest is practice, practice, practice. Now, if you have any questions, hop on the Discord, leave a comment on the video. I'll do my best to answer those as quickly as I can. But you guys, just practice. Feral is such a very fun spec to play. I think you guys are really going to fall in love with it. But that's it for now. Hope you guys have a very good day. Take it easy. Peace.